So, what to do after your PhD in narcissism? Most survivors of narcissistic abuse are left desperately confused, shocked, and incredulous when their partner abandons them or they leave in fear of their sanity. Their perfect soulmate has morphed, usually very suddenly, into a snarling, passive-aggressive monster, or a screaming banshee finding fault with all the personal qualities they once claimed to love. Worse, the narcissist describes their target's behavior to themselves and others in terms that are actually projections of their own behavior, for which they simply cannot be accountable. The discarded spouse, reeling with confusion as to what they possibly did to deserve this punishment, then goes on a desperate search, both internally and externally, for reasons why. They can drown in shame over their own minor faults before they come across the definition of narcissism and find it's like reading the pages of their own diary. The resonance is extraordinary, and they then embark on a prolonged period of intensive study into the way the narcissistic individual's mind works. Survivors quite literally gain more knowledge about narcissism than is ever taught in a university. It can become an obsession, especially for the survivors who experience severe trauma or complex trauma as a result of earlier relational abuse. The realization that they were never loved but merely used by the narcopath for their own advancement, comfort, security, image, gratification is extremely painful. The betrayal trauma usually isn't just about their partner having cheated sexually, but about having been coerced into shedding their social and professional relationships, their careers, their personal hopes and dreams, their life savings, their security, and their place in the world. The narcissist has often eroded the survivor's core values over time, manipulating their trust, generosity, kindness, and other fine human qualities, leaving a deep moral injury. But no matter how much insight the survivor gains into the behavior of the dark personality, there is nothing they can do to change it, particularly in the inevitable post-relationship abuse they are soon to experience, the smear campaign, and the abuse by divorce. They might have tried every tactic from assertive boundary setting to reasoned negotiation and conflict resolution. They might have extracted and reciprocated with 100 promises towards better behaviors, and still found that the narcopath would find a way to manipulate every solemn agreement into a win-lose outcome, the target being the loser, of course. They might have clung to the popular cultural meme that love is all you need for years, subjected to the abusive cycle for way too long, believing their love and compassion could bring about the change in the narcopath that would restore the ideal relationship they signed up for. They might have capitulated by pouring more and more love into the empty vessel that is the narcissist. It's easy to fall into what business calls the sunk cost fallacy, when you've invested too much to quit. They're utterly overinvested. They've invested so much that the loss of the relationship represents loss so huge it leaves them with no life infrastructure, no hope, and no practical possibility of restoring a stable, secure life for themselves. This is one of many answers to the question, why didn't they just leave? Any person who's given up their independent lives, careers, homes, social and professional connections, countries, privilege, income, personal infrastructure, on the basis of a legal contract and solemn vows, would struggle with betrayal trauma when a sworn life partner coerces them into dependence, then suddenly abandons them to an unpredictable fate. Accepting what happened to us, recognizing the hidden abuse, and starting the long hero's journey back to mental, physical, social, professional, and financial health can only happen when we recognize that we can't control another person's behavior. We can only control the way we react to it. We can't change our history of abuse, if we have one. We can only decide who we want to be and be around from today, where we want to go, and how we're going to get there. Narcopaths somehow manage to make us believe that we have no choice, that we're trapped, helpless, and powerless as a result of all that we've sacrificed already for them. In fact, it could be said that narcissistic abuse is characterized by sacrifice on the part of the victim. The victim is then blamed for having sacrificed too much, invested too much, behaved in exactly the same way that many, many women and some men behave after having made sacred vows to the other. Frequently, the victim blamers are other people who fail to recognize that they've made precisely the same compromises and sacrifices in their own partnerships without the devastating repercussions of abandonment and annihilation. The victim blames themselves for having failed to recognize the hidden abuse until it was too late. To survive all this chaotic trauma, we need to recognize that all of these things were and are beyond our control. There is simply no way to make another person cooperate, let alone a narcopath who believes himself superior, is incapable of being accountable, and it's everybody else that's the problem. The more we begin to focus on what is in our control, the more we start to regain energy, agency, and purpose. The more consideration we give to what our true values are, what we really want out of life, and how we want to show up in the world. The more joy will start to shine through the cracks of our grief and loss. Inside severe trauma, the idea that we have a choice about the thoughts that show up in our heads seems utterly ridiculous. We can feel like our mind is controlling us, pushing us around in the reactivity soup we're drowning in. We can beat ourselves up with the second arrow, punish ourselves with shame that we no longer seem able to be the happy, vibrant person we once were, no matter how hard we try to pretend. But we all have the ability to concentrate, and we can train our concentration. Our personalities are not set in stone. They're ever-changing, impermanent. Our brains are wonderful, malleable organs that can build new neural pathways. We can shift the internal circuitry that's constantly lit up in the fight, flight, freeze mechanism to circuitry that is charged with compassion, hope, and joy. It takes time and brain training. It's not a silver bullet. But mindfulness training can create long-lasting change in the brain circuitry. And when we cultivate the mind states that light up the circuits dimmed by trauma, grief, and loss, we gradually take back control over our own healing. Mindfulness is the foundation of Buddhist practice, yoga, Tai Chi, Qigong, amongst others. Online apps such as Insight Timer and Calm offer guided meditations and visualizations for support with everything from addiction through to depression and anxiety. In Western psychology, you'll find more and more therapists trained in the third wave disciplines of ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, and MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction, and MSC, mindful self-compassion. Go to your online book supplier and authors such as Russ Harris, Pema Chodron, Jack Cornfield, Tara Brach, Kristen Neff and Chris Germer, John Kabat-Zinn, Stephen Hayes. I urge you to start reading how-to trauma recovery books and bring your layperson's PhD in narcissism to a close as soon as you've grasped how the mind, lacking emotional empathy and prone to exploit and manipulate others, works. By all means, leave the door open to psychoeducation, with an awareness that there's lots of misinformation and rage around the subject floating around online. Keep your own counsel. Join a support group. Find a therapist you resonate with. Psychoeducation is a painful and necessary part of recovery, and learning is a lifetime's journey. So ask yourself, what do I most need now? And go and do that.